What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Pokemon abilities are an aspect of the games that I greatly appreciate, and one that I love talking about. Many abilities can be quite beneficial, but at the very least most of them are something interesting, that in some way manipulate a part of the game, whether that has to do with items, stat alterations, or even providing an immunity. With a new generation on the horizon, it's got me thinking about what new abilities could possibly be added to the Pokemon franchise. Generation 7 is any indication, then there are a lot of potential entries to consider. So, here are some new possible made-up abilities for the next generation of Pokemon. The first ability that I thought of is Footloose. The musical spirit in this Pokemon is so powerful that when it hears a song, it just can't help but dance. That's the flair text anyway. In functionality, the ability Footloose makes it so that when the Pokemon is hit with any sound-based moves, its speed will increase. There are quite a few sound attacks in Pokemon, so much so that some people want it to be its own type. But with the Footloose ability, it's not like soundproof, because they will still take damage from Hyper Voice or Boom Burst, but assuming they survive, they'll be able to outspeed and then take them out on the next turn. However, big powerful attacks are not the only sound-based moves, because when I was thinking about Footloose, I realized that if you could find a Pokemon with this ability, it would almost be even more valuable in the early game, where almost every other move is Growl. You'd be receiving speed boosts left and right, and it could even continue on a little later with other moves like Screech and Sonic Boom. I think Footloose would be a solid ability for the Pokemon games, and one that could be of great benefit in the right situations. The next ability I've come up with is Tunnel Vision. The Pokemon become so focused on their target that they can only hit them. What this means is that when the Pokemon uses a move that hits multiple targets, it will only hit one. If a Pokemon with Tunnel Vision were to use Surf, you would select a single target to hit just like any other move. I feel that as a trade-off, the power of the move could be increased ever so slightly, maybe just 5 or 10%. That might be considered too powerful by some, say Earthquake at 110 power, but it does balance it out to me since it would only be taking out a single target at a time. And of course, this would open up different strategies for certain moves, since they will no longer hurt your allies in doubles. So really, Tunnel Vision is more for doubles probably and trying out strategies, but could still benefit from the power boost in standard singles format. For the next ability, I got to thinking about status conditions. There are a number of moves that can afflict different statuses on opponents, and there are even some moves whose only purpose is to apply a condition. For all that is, except for freezing, which is understandable since freezing completely stops the target from moving, so guaranteeing that is probably ill-advised, but that's where the ability Permafrost comes in. This ability surrounds the Pokemon in such a frigid aura that the dropped temperatures make the immediate area more prone to freezing. Basically, Permafrost increases the chances of freezing the target by 10%. Now that might seem overpowered because, as we said, no move guarantees freezing, and even the ones that have a chance of freezing generally are only at around 10% to begin with. But a lot of moves that can cause paralysis or burn can at least get up to 30%, so bumping the freeze option up to 20 wouldn't be so bad. It would just be a nice tool to use this usually unpredictable status condition. And of course, it would be reserved only for ice types to be able to wield such power. Another ability that I've thought up is incredibly niche, but rather useful for those that can access it, and that is Safety Net. This ability provides a layer of protection so that the Pokemon doesn't damage itself when missing an opponent. Safety Net is exactly like it sounds, in that it negates any crash damage from when a Pokemon does not land their attack. Now, some of you might be saying that that would be too overpowered as well, but it's really not. Sure, it takes away drawbacks from using moves like Jump Kick and High Jump Kick, but, well, really that's all it does, because those are the only two moves that even use the crash damage mechanic. Believe me, I thought that there were more too, but it's completely separate from the recoil moves, which only damage when you hit the opponent. Crash damage only comes into play when you miss. So Safety Net would offer an interesting advantage to those moves. Not to say that they couldn't still miss, but you just wouldn't kill yourself if you do. And of course, they would have to give the ability to Pokemon that can actually have access to said moves, just not ones that are too powerful. And hey, maybe they could even use this as an excuse to create more Crash moves in the first place. The next ability is Crescendo. This ability has the Pokemon get psyched up when using the same moves in succession. If that sounds a bit familiar, then good for you, because the function is similar to that of Metronome. The item, not the move. The Metronome provides increased power to a move if you keep using it over and over again, which is actually a fine strategy because most people are going to spam the same moves anyway. But that's not all. In my mind, Crescendo would combine that functionality with that of the move Round, which increases with usage even by others on the field. So if a Pokemon that has Crescendo uses, say, Thunderbolt, and then someone else on the field also uses Thunderbolt, it would get double the boosts the next time the Pokemon with Crescendo were to use it again and again. I think this ability would be pretty useful, and could catch some people off guard at first that don't realize that they're fueling their enemy's fire. And it seems to me that it could be fairly widespread, as opposed to some of the more narrowed abilities on the list. Another new ability that could catch people off guard is one called Quick Draw. In a standoff, this Pokemon is able to anticipate the rival's fast movements and go first. Which simply means, if the Pokemon's opponent uses a priority move, the Pokemon with Quick Draw will go first with whatever move they've selected. This ability works with moves that are inherently high priority, but also ones that are affected by their own abilities, like Gale Wings or Triage. So imagine the foe down in the red using extreme speed in an effort to win, only to be baffled when they're outsped and taken out by a random Shadow Ball. Again, I anticipate an outcry of being too powerful, but it only works with increased priority moves. Any standard moves would be based entirely on the speed of the Pokemon, like always. If anything, it's just trying to break people out of their reliance on trying to out-priority Pokemon all the time, and see what other strategies they might come up with. So the potential usefulness of Quick Draw is unbelievably high, but should still probably remain scarce as far as distributions go. The next ability is Petrified. A Pokemon with Petrified has its outer skin hardened to the point that it's almost like rock, causing it to resist heat. This means that the Pokemon will resist fire-type attacks. It just makes sense to me, since Petrified wood in real life pretty much becomes rock. And since rock in the Pokemon games resists fire, it would just work out fine. There are a number of abilities that can alter a Pokemon's resistances, or even provide new weaknesses. However, Petrified, I'm imagining as another one of those abilities that is specific to a certain type, in this case being the Grass type, both fitting perfectly with actual petrification and being able to take away one of the Grass type's most prominent weaknesses. We're told from the very beginning that fire beats grass, so turning that into a neutral would provide a leg up to the Pokemon that already have so many other adversaries. Taking this burden off of certain grass types would be most welcome, and might even make these Pokemon star players. The next ability is called Leadfoot. The Pokemon with Leadfoot has their feet enhanced with greater than usual density, allowing for a much more potent attack. Basically, what this means is that this Pokemon's kick-based attacks have increased power. This is the foot equivalent of the existing ability Iron Fist, which powers up punching moves. Attacks affected by Leadfoot would include the jump kicks that we mentioned earlier, as well as Double Kick and Blaze Kick, and even the move Stomp. Pretty much anything that requires putting your foot down will get a 20% buff. Having access to these moves is obviously important in determining which Pokemon should have Leadfoot as an ability, but it does seem to me that Pokemon with hooves would make sense for this ability as well, especially considering some of their dex entries. So Leadfoot might be slightly less useful than its fist counterpart, but it could still pack quite a wallop, and at least interacts with more moves than some other certain more restrictive abilities. The next ability is simply called Denial. A Pokemon with Denial is excessively stubborn and will not admit to any outside factors, no matter how obviously they might be affected. What this means is that the Pokemon with this ability when afflicted with a status condition, will not succumb to their stat-altering effects. So a Pokemon with Denial, when burned, will not suffer a drop in its attack stat, nor would it have its speed lowered while paralyzed, simply because it's too pig-headed to let something like that get in its way. Now, of course, the status conditions would still have their other effects, like losing a portion of health or being unable to move occasionally, but their base stats would remain unimpaired. Truthfully, Denial would probably be more useful in competitive, where people are more likely to use such status conditions for their stat drops, but it could still kick in nicely in the story portions as well. And I just now thought of this, but maybe it could even prevent any stat alterations in general while affected with a status condition. We'll just have to see. And the last new ability I've come up with is one that I'm quite excited about, called Ricochet. A Pokemon with Ricochet has such an impressive thick hide that energy-based attacks will disperse and some will bounce back to the user. What this actually means in practice is that when a special attack is used against a Pokemon with Ricochet, the opponent will be damaged slightly as well, since some of their energy splashed back to hit them. And if this one sounds familiar, it's because Ricochet is basically the special equivalent of Iron Barbs, or even the Rough Skin ability. But instead of physical touch, you have to watch out for special moves on this one. This ability, or something like it, is absolutely necessary in the Pokemon games, and honestly I'm surprised that we haven't seen it at this point already. Or at the very least, they should create an item that does the same thing to be a counterpart to the Rocky Helmet. So, those are just some of the new abilities that I've thought of for Pokemon. And even though a new generation is just around the corner, this list is not specific to that. Meaning, whether they use the same ideas or not, this list is still solid for creating new Pokemon abilities at whatever point in the future they decide to use them. Which new abilities would you add to Pokemon? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!